So welcome to the WiST network. I'm going to give you a little bit of a, I'm going to say a whistle-stop tour of Technicamps. And the plan for today is that we'll have a little bit of a chance to listen to our speaker, Emily, who's with us today. And then once we've listened to her, we'll ask her some questions. So get your burning questions in your back pocket ready as she's going through. Don't let her off lightly. She's come to join us, and we want her to feel challenged when she goes away. So what is Technicamps? Just for those who are new to us today, who haven't come and been with us before, Technicamps is more than a project. That's the way I always describe it, because it's all about digital upskilling across Wales. And we go primarily into schools, do a lot of work in schools and workshops. We work with the community, and we will be doing more of that later this year. We do a lot of teacher training, and we're funded primarily by the European Social Fund and the Welsh Government. So that's fantastic from our point of view, because all of our services that we offer, we can offer them for free, which is brilliant. And we definitely have an amazing team. These are all the brands that you might see around about Technicamps. So you'll see that the main one there is what we're using going to schools. That's our Technicamps. Inspiring creative fun is our motto. And we go into schools, primary schools, under this playground computing. And the Institute of Coding in Wales is a big thing for us too, where we engage with businesses. So lots of things going there. There's the clubs as well. And we do a live broadcast every week, as well as the clubs. So lots going on. So STEM enrichment is going into secondary schools. So we're working on a £5.3 million European programme across the whole of Wales with all of the universities in Wales. So it's fab to be communicating with other universities and actually being able to go into schools and give them something on top of the curriculum, mainly to inspire them to take up STEM and to take up computer science is one of our goals, to feed that pathway into the university and to feed that pipeline of talent that we need for our businesses, technology-wise, for the future. We have a little niche there, and this is why we do the Women's Network as well, is that we're trying to inspire girls. And we're trying to inspire girls to get into science, technology, engineering, maths, and especially computer science for us, and I think digital. And that's quite a thing to be able to do, because if you go into any computer science degree course at the moment, you'll see there's only 10 to 11% girls. It's rare to get more than that. And if you go into, my name is Judy Walters, I should have introduced myself properly. I am a digital project manager. And if you go into any IT department, you'll see that there are predominantly men who are working in those departments. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just equality of opportunity. We just need to make sure that we're presenting this as a pathway and an opportunity for girls. And that is one of the targets of the European project too. We're starting early. So playground computing is actually going into primary schools. That's important because you want to make sure that that inspiration starts as early as possible and is not at all something that's considered later in life. So we do a lot of coding, and we have the coding clubs that go with that. Obviously, legacy is if you teach the teachers, then it's better because it's going to be for longer. So we are teaching at the moment, there's a new GCSE, new digital technology GCSE, which is being rolled out. And we're helping the teachers with that. So there's new curriculum there for them to pick up. And that will be, well, it's sort of replacing IT as we knew it, and giving more opportunity to do animation and game making and touching on cyber as well. And we have run a year-long course, and we've seen a lot of teachers across Wales go through that course, and they've given them the confidence to move from just using applications to actually going into the back end and the coding and understanding the software as well and how to build that themselves, working in robotics and also coding and programming languages. The clubs are very successful since COVID. Obviously, we ended up going virtual. So these are running virtually at the moment, and I think they start next month. So we'll be running those so that anybody can join them, and normally between the ages of 9 and 15, somewhere around that sort of age group. And they're very popular, and it gives a chance to learn coding, get inspired. We've got ambassadors within the university who are also, there's nothing more inspiring to children than having somebody that almost their age coming in and showing them that this was the career that they chose, or this was the course that they chose that would work with us. We do some great events like today. Hopefully it's going to be a great event on your calendar. We do a really big event normally on International Women's Day, and we did actually manage to have the Minister for Education, the head of education for BBC, and this lady is a nuclear physicist who came and spoke to us. Brilliant. So we do lots of competitions. I'll whiz through that because there's always competition on. We're going to be doing something with the RAF shortly, and we're going to do something with Lego too. We've got some great reports because our marketing lady who's with us at the moment is great at doing reports, and our branding is fab. Lots of yellow. I've actually gone yellow today. I've got my yellow cardigan on, ready for that. Working with the WJAC on the curriculum and with Qualification Wales, and all of our resources are free because of the way we're funded, which is great. And on our website, technicamps.com, there's those resources. Business engagement, Maria's with us today. Big shout out if anybody is interested in doing a free degree apprenticeship. Get in touch with Maria and speak to her today. It's a BSc in applied software engineering. I got that right? Can nod at me, please, Maria. That's right. And that's a 3-year course that is brilliantly organised so that you can actually just take an afternoon off from work and actually manage to get that qualification, a full degree through this process. Works really well for businesses and for the individual. So there's some of the people who've been through the course and some of our course tutors, and also the Director of Technicamps there too. This is the network that you've joined today. We're trying to grow this network so that encourages so anybody interested who would like to get involved, maybe go into a school with us after a workshop or before and talk a little bit and make it real, that career pathway, that would be helpful. So there's my quick tour, done quite well. I've stuck to pretty much my 5 minutes. As I said, more than just a project. STEM Digital Upskilling in Wales. We're working with the schools, community, teachers, European Social Fund, an amazing team. Wow, a lot going on. Right, well, you haven't come to hear me speak, but I just wanted to let you know what Technicamps is up to. It's always good to share that. What we are going to go on to now is introduce Emily. There she is. You're going to see her in the flesh in a minute, obviously, well, on screen. I'm going to introduce her as the head of customer success, EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East and Africa, which I think is vast. You're only a couple of continents missing out of that, and you've conquered the world there, Emily. So that's brilliant. And they're a company which is huge. It was bigger than I thought. I checked it. It was 1037 employees, over 1,000 employees, and over 2,000 customers, many of them blue chip customers, and on track to be turning over 170 million. So not a small company in any shape or form. And they are renowned and well known for a phrase that they've coined, which is RPA, and Robotic Process Automation. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you, and we're going to learn about how to be more efficient in what we do, and then get your questions ready, and we're going to challenge Emily thereafter. So.
Thank you very much. I'll just hopefully share the right screen. Well, I like the fact that I look so happy in my bio shot. Somebody obviously said something quite funny at the time. Right, thank you for really good introduction. Saves me talking about some of the stuff that I was going to talk about too, which is good. So Emily Bristow, Head of Customer Success for EMEA, as Julie said, for Blue Prism. Today what I'm going to talk about is automation and how it can help you to be more efficient, and possibly in ways that you might not have thought about before today. I'm going to give some real life examples of how organizations are using automation, and then I'm going to give some tips at the end on how to actually get started or to be successful with doing this within your own organizations. Before I launch into that though, what I thought it would be useful to do is to give you an idea of who I am, what I do, and to talk a little bit about who Blue Prism are, just to set the scene a little bit. So I'm a history graduate. I left university, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I ended up working in IT and telecoms recruitment, and while it was lucrative, it wasn't really for me. I didn't particularly enjoy it. And then one day, I walked into Microsoft's Reading campus for a meeting about recruitment, and I was met at reception by a fridge full of Coca-Cola and a foyer full of Xboxes, and I thought right there, right then, that I want to work in IT. And not long after that, I quit recruitment. I went back to university full-time to do a master's in information systems management at UWIC, as it was then. And I landed, when I was doing that, I landed a graduate role at Logica. Now, Logica then became CGI. So for those of you, if any of you are from the Bridgend area, you may well know CGI because they pretty much own most of the offices there. Got a really big workforce there. And I was there for 9 years. I started in application support. I moved into a service lead role, then I moved into infrastructure, and I headed up the problem and change management teams. And then when I finished at CGI, I was actually head of intelligent automation, which basically meant that I was looking after a team of developers who were building process automations, both internally for CGI, but for some of our customers using this tool called Blue Prism. So in 2018, then I decided I was going to jump ship to go to Blue Prism. And the reason I did that was because I'd been at CGI quite a long time, but I wanted to be far more customer facing. I wanted to travel, and there was lots of travel in this new role. And I really just wanted to get some expertise, like proper deep level expertise in this new cool thing called RPA, which I'll talk about a little bit in a moment. So I joined as a customer success director, and basically it's a bit like Ron Seal. It does exactly what it says on the tin. The whole point of the role is to try to make our customers as successful as possible. And we do that by being trusted advisors, but also by kind of acting like an orchestrator within the business. So we pull in different people from within Blue Prism to help customers. So it can be quite a challenging role, but it's also a really exciting one. And now as you can see from my job title, I head up the customer success team for Europe, Middle East and Africa. So I've got a team of a really stellar team, actually, of customer success directors, managers and associates across Europe who look after all sorts of customers in all sorts of industries. I guess our biggest customers tend to be in financial services, healthcare, telecoms, but pretty much across the board. If you can think of an organization or a big ticket company, the likelihood is that there'll be some kind of customer of ours, which is obviously pretty cool. So let's actually get down to why we're here. What the heck is Blue Prism? And in its simplest form, as Julie said, it's robotic process automation, it's RPA. Now, RPA is a piece of software which can mimic how a human interacts with an application. So if you imagine sitting at a computer, which isn't a stretch because most of you are sitting at a computer right now watching this, and imagine that you're doing a really mundane task. It might be something like you are taking data from one system to another system. So you might be opening an Excel spreadsheet, copying data out of that, and then putting it into your HR system. And you're clicking through the different applications as you do that. Well, RPA can do that. It can do it exactly the same way that you do through the graphical user interface. And that's cool because it means it doesn't have to go into the back end of applications, doesn't have to go into the database, doesn't have to go through APIs. It can all be done through the same screens that you would do. Clicks on the same fields, enter the same fields as you do. And what that means is that you don't have to be a technical whiz to be able to automate your own processes. And the whole point of RPA was that people within the business can automate their own work. They don't need to go to IT to ask for help on something. Important point to note, especially for you guys that might work in IT, that is not to say that you don't involve IT at all, because actually IT are absolutely critical to RPA projects and programs. From a platform perspective, from a security perspective, from getting access to the applications, all that good stuff. If you don't get IT involved, it's very difficult to do really well. So that's just something to think about. But where we really see RPA reaping the benefits for organizations is where it really sits in the business. So it can be hard to visualize what it actually looks like. So I'm going to refer, some people refer to them as robots. I'm going to refer to them as digital workers. But I thought it'd be useful to show you what they actually look like in real life. So as you can see, the robot, the digital worker, is essentially a series of steps, logical steps, like a flow chart. And you can build in decision points, you can build in different checks and balances, so you can constantly get it to check its own work. And it will only do what you tell it to do. They can't go rogue, they can't go doing random things. They're pretty dumb. They will do what they are told to do, which is obviously pretty useful. And once these are built, once these processes are built, you can then schedule them so that they get run like at a certain time of day or a certain frequency. You can get them to be triggered by certain events, or you can just run them on demand. You know, if you have like a sudden peak at a certain time of year, if you're doing your finances, you might just want to run it once a year. You would have to look at the benefits of it. Otherwise, you might run something daily or weekly, etc. Now, each digital worker, they can run multiple processes. They can be multi-skilled. So you can have a worker can sit there, and in the morning, it could be a HR bot. At lunchtime, it could be doing finances. In the afternoon, it could do customer service. Overnight, it could be running reports that are ready for you in the morning. They run 24/7, 365, and they're super flexible. You can have multiple digital workers running on one process if it's a really high volume process, maybe student recruitment. Oh, certain time of year, skipping ahead there. There's no digital workers involved in this, I promise. So yeah, so they're really, really flexible. And this is what I'd refer to as a digital workforce. And the drag and drop approach that you can hopefully, if I can get it working again. No, there we go. The drag and drop interface there, that makes it really easy to develop. So as I say, you don't need to be a technical whiz to be doing this. As long as you can think logically, you can build a process automation. The other aspect that's really cool about this is that the more processes you build, the quicker it gets to build, because we use these reusable pieces that we call objects. And I do risk going into too much detail here, but basically, if you've got an application that you run a lot of processes on, you could, for example, build an object that logs into that application. And then every single process you've got that uses that application can call that one object. So you build a nice object library. Each process thereafter is much quicker to build, but also if that screen changes for the login page, you only have to update the one object, not 200 processes. So I risk going into too much detail, but if you have any questions on that, please ask me during the Q&A. One thing to note as well, you wouldn't actually see this. So this would all be happening in the data center. So each digital worker has its own virtual desktop, just like you've got your own desktop. These guys have got theirs, but you wouldn't see it. What you would see is maybe the output. So if they're sending you an email or if they're sending you a report, that's what you would see. The rest of the time, they're beavering away, safe and secure in their data center, not getting in anybody's way. And what I'm talking about here is what I would call enterprise level. I'm not even going to go and try and go back. This is enterprise automation. So there's different levels of automation. You can have enterprise level where it's in a data center or it's hosted on the cloud, centrally governed, centrally managed. Or you can have desktop automation where you can run things like Power Automate on your desktop, all the way down to macros for Excel. It's kind of horses for courses, really, and there's benefits and downsides to all of them, depending on the piece of work that you're trying to do or what your objective is. So finally, I'm going to go to this slide. There are some really, really good benefits to automation. Obviously, it's why it's so popular. Even having one or two digital workers can make a really big difference. There are the obvious ones in that these digital workers will run 24/7, 365, and that obviously gives you extra time in the day. It can take time. It can give time back to people so that they can focus on more value-adding tasks and not having to do those admin tasks. That's kind of the most obvious benefit from an automation perspective. But there's also those benefits that don't necessarily get captured early on. So things like if you've got a process, an upstream process, and you start automating that, and therefore the data is much more accurate, you're getting fewer mistakes, you're able to ensure that that information is spot on. That has a really positive effect downstream, because the processes down there, they don't have to keep going back a PS in, oh, well, this data is wrong, or I need to chase somebody because of this. So the savings elsewhere in the business that you might not necessarily capture, they're more intangible, but they're still really, really powerful. Another one is regulatory compliance. So like banks or healthcare, pharmaceuticals, whatever, they have regulation that they need to meet. They have to meet certain times to respond to customers, that kind of stuff. We see a lot of customers that use digital workers to do those compliance pieces, and therefore they avoid fines, which is obviously good, but also it improves the customer experience. And to be honest, for me, that one's kind of like the sexiest benefit in terms of improving customer experience, because it does it in automation can do it in a couple of ways. So if you're talking to a customer and you've got really accurate information in front of you, that obviously helps the experience. If you're able to respond faster to their queries, that gives them a better customer experience. But also the fact that your customer facing people, citizen facing, student facing folk, if they don't have to do a load of admin as well, they've actually got more time to spend with individual customers, or they can talk to more customers, or they can focus on more complex cases, maybe complaints, things like that. So it can have a really significant impact on that. And I will cover that a little bit when I talk about some of the real life examples a little bit later. And the last one there, more data insight. Because you've got digital workers doing this process, you're actually building up a record of how many transactions have gone through, how many reports have they run, how much time are they spending doing certain things. That's data they wouldn't necessarily get if it was people doing the work. So that can give you all sorts of different insight, can potentially drive new opportunities, etc. So one thing I'll say is that if you are looking at automation, a good way to do it is to think, okay, if I had an extra 30 people in my team, what would I do? What would I do with that time? Or if I had spare 2 days, I could work, if everybody could work weekends or overnight, what would I do? And that's a great way to think about a digital workforce and automation. So I think it'd be useful at this point just to give a few real life examples of what's been automated at various different customers and how it's helped those organizations. I'm going to start by talking about public sector orgs, because I think a lot of people who are on this call, that's the sector you guys are from. So with COVID and with just the usual pressures of increased demand and tighter budgets or aging populations, regulation, we have definitely seen at Blue Prism an increase in interest from NHS, local government, policing, education. In the last sort of 18 months, 2 years, it's really, really picked up. So if I just give a couple of examples then. So if we look at, as a district council, South Kesteven, hopefully pronouncing that right, they initially looked at RPA because they were looking at, they had a double whammy of tighter budgets and increased demand for services, which is obviously a tricky balance to get. And they initially identified 90 odd processes that they were going to automate or had potential to be automated. And then they decided they would focus on revenue and benefits, customer service, and housing and benefit. And the biggest impact that they saw, certainly at the start of the project, was a massive uptick in customer satisfaction. And that was especially true with their most vulnerable citizens, so the people that were connecting with the revenue and benefits department for obvious reasons, so that they had really, really positive outcomes there. Similarly, if you look at Norfolk County Council, they had similar pressures and they were looking to free up more time so that people were, they focused actually on well-being. So they wanted to free people up from doing really mundane, boring tasks and get them focused on far more interesting work. And actually, when they started, they were kind of similar to me in CGI in that they were quite focused on IT. So IT processes like setting up user access and permissions, that kind of stuff. And then once they proved it there, they then rolled it out wider, and they started looking at things like social work, social care, which is quite similar to what the guys up in City of Edinburgh have done. They've automated lots of things, but a real focus on social work, and basically like being able to automate things like weekly reports that were going out to social workers. And before, they might get multiple emails going out, and the tasks that they needed might be spread out across multiple emails. It was quite difficult for the social workers to find everything and have it quickly at hand. So they automated that, which freed up the admin time from a report production point of view, but also meant that the social workers were getting one report with all of their tasks amalgamated in one place, and they didn't have to mess about going trying to find multiple emails. So it saved loads of time there. And obviously that's quite an important area. So it made really big impact there. If I look at NHS, we've got multiple trusts who are using automation. They use it for things like appointment management, like cancelling appointments, that kind of stuff, updating patient records, sending follow-ups for next appointments or treatment results, that kind of stuff. What's really cool about what the NHS are doing, and we're looking to replicate it across other sectors as well, is that because they use very similar applications to one another, because they use, well, they've got the same processes, a lot of them, or very similar, they actually share content. So they share objects, they share processes, so that they don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. So it's a really, really effective approach. And say NHS kind of leading the way on that, which is really cool. I'm going to say cool a lot. That was really cool. If we look at universities, we've got Staffordshire, UCL, a few others. They look at things like student recruitment, automating that, onboarding, timetabling, as well as the kind of usual stuff of finances and accounting and so on, which is what we see a lot of in the private sector. And I'm just going to touch on one in the private sector, just because it's my favorite use case. So there's a company called Danica Pensions in the Nordics, and they're a really good example of where an organization has gone, right, we really want to embrace digital workers and human workers working together, to the point where 20% of their total workforce is a digital worker. And they're running all sorts of processes. One of the really, really powerful ones that they've got is around anti-money laundering. So they have digital workers checking things like running background checks, checking ID registration. And if a case is low risk, then the digital worker can close it. It doesn't need human interaction. But if it's a bit questionable, then they will hand it over to a human with all of the information, and they'll be like, right, there you go, crack on, you make the decision, which is a really powerful one. And it shows digital workers and human workers really working hand in digital hand. So that's a few examples. There's loads more out there, and I'm happy to answer questions around that side of things. But what actually makes a good process? Because I've mentioned a few there, and there's quite a few criteria that I could talk about that make a good process automation. But when you're starting out, when you're thinking about this early on, and I'm going to use some horrible businessy terminology, but you tend, when you start out, to look at the low-hanging fruit and to get quick wins. So the three that I've got up here are the ones that are real flashing lights. This process would probably be good to automate. So if the process is highly repetitive and it's repeatable, that's a really good sign. If it's high frequency, high volume, it's definitely worth taking a look at. If it's something that takes 5 minutes once a year, probably not. But if it's something that takes a couple of hours every day, definitely worth looking at. And then, has it got structured data? So by structured data, I mean like information that's in a system, or it's coming through in a form, or it's in an Excel spreadsheet, not a really ranty email from a customer that's complaining. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on, but that's what we mean by structured. So if the process ticks those boxes, the likelihood is it's going to be a really good candidate to automate. Other criteria would be things like, is the process well understood? Is it already documented? How often does it change? If you've got a process that changes every day, probably not the best one to automate. And what applications does it touch? If it's an application that falls over every 2 seconds, again, you might not want to look at that one as one of your first processes. And what's really interesting, and certainly something that I found in my time at CGI, is how many times people will say, when you start looking for processes to automate, and they will say, no, you definitely cannot automate this process. It is way too complicated and there's too much human judgment involved. And sometimes that's driven by fear. You know, people do worry, if I let them automate this process, then I'm not going to have a job to do. And that's actually a very rare thing to happen. But mostly it's driven from a genuine feeling that a process can't be automated, but that it is too reliant on human judgment. But often, actually, when you scratch the surface of that process, you ask a few questions, you actually understand that most of the human judgments that are being made are based on a logical set of rules. And even if 100% of that process can't be automated, because there are some that are a bit questionable, some rules you might not hit, the likelihood is 70, 80, 90% of that process could probably be automated. So it's still worth looking at. It's still a good opportunity. The other interesting thing is that when you're going through this process, when you start sitting down with people and talking to them about what they're working on, and I try to identify these processes, is how many you will find that you could already make massive improvements without automating anything. So I've been in situations where someone has run a report and then waited like an hour for that report to run, and then gone on to tell me about the rest of the process, only to discover actually they could just get the report automatically run out of that system overnight into their inbox in the morning. Don't need a digital worker to save time there, just need to actually use the tools that you've already got. And the other aspect is where people spend a lot of time, and it is generally with reporting, where they spend a number of hours every week running reports, but nobody reads the reports. And I dread to think how many people across the world are generating reports that nobody ever reads. So even just the nature of asking people about what they're working on, digging a bit deeper into processes, you identify loads of possible savings before you even touch automation. So it's a really valuable piece of work to go through anyway. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention was that there's going to be times where you come across processes that they might have, let's say, like a ranty email from somebody, or just any sort of email that's not structured might come in, or it might be like a handwritten form might come in, and that might be the start of the process. The digital workers, in their purest sense, are dumb. They will only do what they're told to do. They don't really have massive intelligence. But if you picture them, if any of you are gamers, if you picture a digital worker like a really basic video game character, like when you're first starting out in a game and you're learning how it goes, and you can get to a certain point just using that basic character. And then as time evolves, you need to get that magic sword, or you need to get the dragon armor or the RPG or whatever it may be, and plug it into your player, and then you can do more. And that's kind of how it works with Blue Prism, with digital workers. You can plug in additional skills. So if you've got invoices coming in, you could plug in optical character recognition or intelligent document processing, or if you need to be able to read emails and judge the sentiment in them, you could plug in natural language processing, that kind of stuff. So you can always add in extra elements. So if a process can't be automated just yet, just park it, don't bin it, because the likelihood is that as an automation program grows, that you can add in these additional technologies and do way, way more than you can with just a basic digital worker. So hopefully that makes sense. And then finally, I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea, or give you some tips, 4 tips on if you do want to go ahead with automation, what are the sort of things that you need to think about. And these probably are the 4 main ones that I would talk to customers about. There are others, but these are the main 4. So firstly, I mentioned it earlier, look to set it up in the business. Don't necessarily look to set it up in IT. The benefit of this is business users can use this tool. They can prioritize their work as they see fit. It doesn't need to go into a backlog somewhere and then it'll always get deprioritized because it might be a small process. Actually, if the business are doing it, they can prioritize their own work. Having said that, engage IT early. IT are absolutely make or break with these things. It should be business-led, but I say IT absolutely fundamental. Fail to get their buy-in, prepare to fail. It's pretty much as stark as that. Bring in Yoda. I'm a big believer in having mentors in place. So especially at the start of an automation program, whether that be bringing in a partner to help get set up initially, or whether that's recruiting in a contractor or a permanent member of staff that's got experience. This was a big thing when we started out in my previous role. It wasn't really until we brought in someone who'd used Blue Prism before and done a load of work with it that the team suddenly started really fast tracking and getting more done and having much better practices. So I call it bringing Yoda because it's kind of fun. And then finally, get the top bosses on board. So get those exec sponsors in place. Someone that's willing to advocate for automation, who can kind of open doors if you want to expand it into the wider business, or just get the resources that you need to do what you need to do. Without having an exec sponsor, it can end up kind of a tactical little deployment. But really, as the example of Danica shows, this can be really big and can really go across an entire organization. It doesn't need to just be stuck in one department. So that was a whistle-stop tour of automation, and I've undoubtedly gone into too much detail on some things and probably not enough detail on other things.
Okay, cool. Thank you everybody for today and for joining us. Thank you, Emily, again. Thanks everybody. Okay, goes off. Bye.